Africa is home to some of the world's richest natural resources. Sitting on a treasure trove of untapped potential, Africa has over 30% of the world's mineral reserves. No wonder Africa has been seen as the future of global supply chains.
But it's not just about the minerals. Africa's fertile land makes it the perfect place to cultivate a variety of crops, everything from cocoa, coffee and tea to cassava, maize and legumes. It's a market that feeds billions and offers huge growth potential for investors looking at the future of food security and agribusiness. By the way, my name is Hawa and I represent the western part of Africa.
And that's just the start. Africa's energy sector is rapidly evolving with abundant natural resources like solar, wind, and hydropower. The continent is positioned to become a global leader in renewable energy. Countries like South Africa, Egypt, and Kenya are already making significant strides towards energy independence and sustainability.
Don't even get me started about what makes Africans stand out. Of course, it's its people, the young, dynamic, and entrepreneurial spirit that is fueling the rise of technology and innovation. We are seeing incredible growth in sectors like fintech, e-commerce, and mobile technology. The continent's digital transformation is creating new opportunities for businesses and investors, and the pace is only accelerating.
Discussing trends, challenges, and opportunities available in Africa is what we discuss on Invest Africa Podcast.
Invest Africa Podcast.
You are Africans. We are Africans. Louder. We are Africans. Louder. We are Africans. Come on, Africans. Yeah. We are Africans. I can hear you. We are Africans. Louder. We are Africans. Come on, Africans.
So whether you are a seasoned investor or someone looking to explore the emerging markets, the Invest Africa podcast is here to help you navigate this exciting landscape. Join us as we take you on a journey to Africa's abundant resources, thriving industries, and the game-changing investments that are shaping the future of the continent.
The Invest Africa Podcast, shaping Africa's investment landscape.
Hi guys, welcome back to another deep dive session here on the Invest Africa Group podcast. I'm your host, Mubarak Abimbola, and as usual, I have Awa Adekbise. What's up, Awa?
Hi, Mubarak. And hello to our listeners. So good to be here once again, taking you through the twists and turns of investment across Africa. How are you, Mubarak?
Well, I'm very fine, Awa. It's good to be back again on the show. Well, today we are stepping into a conversation that feels both unusual and inevitable. You know, for decades, Africa was painted as a continent people left in search of opportunity. But, suddenly we are seeing a quiet redirection. Okay, the flow is reversing. Europeans are moving to Africa. This time not for tourism, okay? Not for short-time mission, but, for life, to live there, which is something I would never have imagined in the last 10, 15 years.
I mean, Mubarak, I agree with you. I couldn't have imagined it as well, that Europeans would be relocating to countries like Kigali, Dakar, Accra, or Mombasa for better opportunities, in quotes. I would have laughed if someone said something like that to me in about 15 years ago, because the old narrative was deeply conditioned. Africa was seen as a place where people escaped from, not where they escaped to. But now we are seeing data, we are seeing stories, and there is also a movement on ground, all pointing at something different, something transformative, and that's what we'll be talking about on today's show.
Exactly. We are talking about the quiet reverse migration. Why more Europeans are moving to Africa as the West declines. Okay, our Europe is changing slowly. That's one thing I've noticed. Changing slowly, anxiously, almost reluctantly. And Africa is changing boldly, fast, and unapologetic. And somewhere between those two extremes is a surprising demographic shift that has started. Take Rwanda, for example. The country has recorded a steady rise in European entrepreneurs applying for business visa since 2022. Also, Cape Verde's government reported a surge in remote working Europeans relocating for its digital nomad residency program. The Ghana's expatriate community in Accra is now over 80,000 strong. Many of them Europeans in their 20s and 30s. I mean, that is signaling something.
Absolutely. Look at Kenya as well. Nairobi is becoming the Berlin of East Africa. Coffee shops are now full of laptops, co-working spaces are expanding, and long-term European residents are beginning to group in, all signaling the same thing. They are saying life feels better in these places. It's easier to build, to breathe, and to actually afford a future. I mean, isn't that wild?
Well, it is, if you ask me. But, it also makes sense because if we zoom out, Europe isn't the same Europe that existed 20 or even 10 years ago. They now have aging populations, stagnant wages, looming recession risk, housing crisis, political extremism, energy insecurity, shrinking middle class, a slow cultural burnout, and at the same time, Africa, for the first time in modern history, offering one thing Europeans increasingly say they cannot find at home.
Okay, so let's go in depth into what this shift that no one predicted is actually about. Let's walk through it slowly. Because this reverse migration isn't driven by a single factor, right? It's an ecosystem of pushes and pulls. So let's start with the push. European inflation hit multi-decade heights between 2022 to 2024. Housing became unaffordable in cities like London, Berlin, Barcelona, right? Energy bills skyrocketed, the job market tightened, political polarization worsened. And the most important one is the cultural frustration. The cultural frustration grew exponentially, and Europe just started becoming heavy, especially for the Europeans.
And, I like the fact that you mentioned the push. So let me come up with the pull. Why it is a situation of push and pull. Okay. While Europe became heavy, political polarization worsened, African major cities began to rise, not quietly, not timidly, but confidently. Whether we like it or not, Lagos has become one of the world's fastest growing fintech capitals in the entire world. I mean, it's so beautiful to watch. Then there is Nairobi that became a global hub for climate tech innovation. Also, we had Kigali that became Africa's model city for safety, digital governance, and ease of doing business. What about Dakar? Dakar became West Africa's emerging creative capital, and Mauritius became a magnet for high net worth entrepreneurs through its residency incentives. So you can see the push and pull. While the push is coming from Europe, Africa is offering the pull.
And this shift isn't just economic. It's cultural, it's psychological, it's lifestyle theory. So the Europeans say Europe has so much has already been built, right? It's a developed nation, right? Many Europeans feel boxed in their own systems. Work feels more stressful, life feels more expensive, the future feels more uncertain because you are living in a cycle of things that has already been created, right? Meanwhile, in Africa, certain cities offer what Europe used to offer in the 1960s, a chance to build something new. That confidence, that mindset, upliftment that comes when you're actually building something. I was reading an article by Le Monde Afrique. A French couple was being interviewed. That's like a research article. And they were saying that Africa feels alive, right? Europe feels more tired. And that line stuck with me. So I'm viewing it as Europeans see Europe as somewhere that has been developed, and it's hard to actually feel like you're making an impact. Or like coming to Africa where, the development is growing, any little thing you do, you see the impact, and you just have that personal, should I call it joy of actually doing something?
Yeah, I think I quite agree with you. And beyond the policy and lifestyle shift, I can see that the movement is visible in three strong migration groups. Okay, the first one will be the remote workers and digital nomads. Europeans in tech, design, marketing, consulting, research people who can work from anywhere are choosing Africa deliberately. You would ask me why? Yeah. We have lower cost of living in Africa, better weather, more space, growing co-working culture, stronger sense of community, and frankly, more joy. Countries like Cape Verde, Rwanda, South Africa, and Kenya have become top global destinations for remote workers. And the funny thing is that the people are not looking at Africa as a gap year gateway. Yeah, they're starting businesses. They are marrying Africans, they are raising children here. Thousands of European families are now enrolling their kids in African schools, especially in Senegal, Kenya, Rwanda, Ghana, Mauritius, because the international education sector on the continent has exploded.
Like, it has exploded exponentially. We've talked about, the rising education shift in Africa, right? You might want to go back to some of our previous episodes to listen to that. That you've given the first point out of the three strong migration groups. I'll go with the second, right? And these are the builders. Young Europeans, especially those frustrated with bureaucracy and slow economies back at home, are moving to Africa to create startups in food processing, agri-tech, ecotourism, solar energy, logistics, wellness and nutrition. I mean, name it, you find European builders, right, in these sectors. And some of them raise capital faster in Africa than they ever could in Europe. And the truth is, Africa makes entrepreneurship feel less impossible, right? There's a sense of expansion, not contraction.
Yeah, I quite agree with you. Though it is easier for Europeans in Africa to secure funding than Africans in Africa to secure funding. So yes, that is really a solid point. Well, the last group of those that are migrating will be the retirees. I mean, what best way to enjoy your retirement than to live and have no worries? That's why you're seeing retirees, European retirees from Italy, Germany, France, and the UK, moving to Mauritius, Cape Verde, South Africa, Namibia, Senegal, for the quality of life these African countries offer. And, they are bringing their money into our economies. Africa is becoming slowly what Southeast Asia was for Western retirees 20 years ago. Warmer, cheaper, kinder, less lonely, and more communal. That's one of the things they are looking for. And Africa just have them in abundance. So I'm not surprised that there is reverse migration. Looking at all of these groups with their needs, their push, their pull. I mean, it is not surprising that Africa is like the home for Europeans these days.
This group you mentioned, right, makes me remember a neighbor of mine. I think it's from Germany. I lived with him for a couple of years and we got talking at some point, right? And let me try to guess. I'll put him in the retiree age group or should I say migrant group, because he was in his 60s or 70s, right? The guy was just a low-key guy, goes out for a job, comes back home, something like that. And he was telling me that for years, he has lived all around Europe. He lived in Germany. He was in Austria at some point, right? And for him, life felt like a treadmill. Everything was expensive. Everyone was stressed, too much to do. And there was no space to actually relax or dream, right? And a business brought him to Nigeria in the I think 90s or something. And since then, he said he had knew that whenever it was time to retire, he's coming to live in Africa. And he chose Nigeria. And this story is becoming more common, especially among young European families who feel trapped between economic stagnation and rising extremism at home. So now that we've looked at the what, right, let's dig into the why. Because this shift, the Europeans relocating to Africa, didn't happen in a vacuum. It's happening because Europe itself is changing, and honestly, not in ways many Europeans expected. And Barack, what's interesting is that these push factors are not dramatic collapses, right? They are slow leaks that over time bring the sense of stability and possibility people once took for granted.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's be honest, our Europe has always had this global image of order, stability, wealth, structure. But if you look at it today, or when you talk to people, some of our brothers that left Nigeria, that left Africa to these European countries, when you talk to people in Germany, France, the UK, Italy, Belgium, even Spain, the common words is getting harder. It's becoming too expensive. I can't afford the future. The system is failing us. So that's like the common phrases they have. Let's now break this down. The biggest pressure points pushing Europeans towards Africa. And the first one would be the Europe's inflation. Okay, whether we like it or not, Europe's inflation and cost of living crisis, as well as the quiet erosion of middle classes, is one big reason why Europeans are moving from Europe to Africa. Let's start with the big one. Between 2022 and 2025, Europe experienced its longest inflation wave in almost 50 years. Food prices jumped, housing costs exploded, energy bills doubled, or in fact, tripled in some regions. In the UK, even dual income households report that they can't save at all. Imagine, in Germany, middle-class families are dipping into savings for basic month-to-month expenses. Spain and Italy, you don't even want to go there. Youth unemployment is disturbingly high. From the outside, if you're in Africa, if you're in America, if you look at it, you feel like Europe is stable. But in the inside, or on the inside, I beg your pardon, many families are financially suffocating.
Okay, and that's the part, right, about that many Africans don't see. We only see the skyscrapers, metros, museums, clean streets, the opportunities. But when you talk to the people living there, you hear a different story. And this is the story that most Africans don't like to believe, right? They will still tell you that they rather would go there to experience these issues you are talking about than be in Africa. But when you look at it, right, when you speak to people actually experiencing what it is like to live in Europe, you hear stories like rent is impossible, groceries are really painful, utility feels predatory, healthcare waiting list stretch months. You see people actually coming down to Africa because the healthcare wait list is too long for them to actually wait. Taxes, they talk about how taxes eat up everything they earn. And it's crazy. That's just one part. Not to even talk about housing, because that one is brutal. In cities like Lisbon, Barcelona, Dublin, Amsterdam, Paris, just to mention a few, the housing market is broken. People making £60,000 per year, what used to be a solid salary, are living with roommates in their 30s and 40s because they can't afford the rent, right? Many Europeans feel like they're working only to pay bills. No life, no savings, no future. And then they come to Africa and they realize they can rent a spacious house in Nairobi, Kigali, Accra for just a fraction of the cost that they are paying monthly.
Well, I was opportune to get into a UN program for journalists, and I was talking to one of my colleagues there, and this guy earns about 3,200 euros per month, and he's still broke every month. I mean, that's what he said. He said, "This is not life." I was like, "Guy, you're earning £3,200. That's 3,200 euros. I beg your pardon. Why am I saying pounds? God, 3,200 euros per month, and you still broke, bro. If I earning 3,200 euros monthly now, I would live a decent lifestyle. I tell you, very decent. So, and that's the reality for most of them. Most of them in Europe. But compare that to compare the amount they pay for rent in Europe. Compare that to Lekki or Labon or in Kyovu. When they come here, they feel like they can live here. They can breathe. Like, if you look at the amount they pay per month for rent, and sum it up, probably 4 months, you will be able to afford the rent for a year here. So their 4 months rent, or you can even build your house, exactly, though that would be dependent on the area you want to live for. But 4 months rent there can get you a year apartment here. And that's like the irony of these things. So one thing I notice about Europeans is that they dream of home ownership. But while they are there, that dream is dead. In Berlin, 80% of residents there are renters. In London, the average house price is 11 times the average annual salary. In fact, a lot of friends I have that live in the UK, that works in London, they don't even live in London. They live in the outskirts city of London just because of the fact that London is expensive. The rent there is expensive. So in Amsterdam, young people are literally leaving the city because they can't even stay. But ironically, Africa has become the place where Europeans can reclaim their idea of living and not just surviving. And the last reason why this pressure point is pushing, Europeans to Africa will be because of the energy insecurity and the post-Ukraine shock. I mean, we won't be capturing everything if we don't mention the war, the Russia-Ukraine war, and how it has affected Europe a lot. In fact, this one is really talked about. The European energy crisis has changed everything. Since the Russia-Ukraine war started, it has forced Europe to scramble for energy resources. Of course, Russia is the biggest exporter of gas. But ever since the war started, we all know what has been happening. So gas prices are soared, electricity costs doubled. Some industry even struggle to stay open. Factories have cut production. Families cut eating. I think I read on Twitter that in winter 2023, many households had to choose between eat or food. For family to choose between staying warm or eating, do you know what that means? It's really appalling. And from 2023 till now, energy prices still remain unstable. But here in Africa, despite its challenges, it offers something alternative or something deeply attractive. There's land, there's sun, there's warmth, and increasingly energy independence. We now have solar villages in Rwanda, green energy projects in Kenya, wind farms in Morocco, hydropower expansions in Ethiopia. We are not seeing Europeans saying, I want to live somewhere where energy isn't a daily fight. Even if you can design your own energy plan in Africa for not so much money. We already have sun here in Africa, so you don't need to pay for eating. If you need to cool out the household, if you have the access, you can cut off, you can stay off grid, power your own AC without paying so much. That's like the main reason why we're having this push and pull, why we're having Europeans saying let's damn Europe. Let's go and live in Africa.
Absolutely. Right. And it would be important to add to what you said, right, that I think the political landscape is also adding to this tension or to the push, if you ask me, right? Europe is shifting ideologically in ways that many Europeans find scary. Far-right parties are rising, you see anti-immigration laws choking, street protests, cultural tension, deep political divides, right? For many Europeans, the continent feels like it's losing its cultural balance. And here's the twist. While African youths are fighting for better governance, European youth are fleeing from a governance landscape that feels increasingly unstable, right? And this migration flow is like almost poetic in their irony, right? And then there's the retreat of the Western middle class, right? The European middle class is shrinking, African middle class is rising. In 2030, Africa will surpass Europe in working age population by over 600 million people. And Europeans are looking at this upward trajectory and thinking, this is where growth is happening, right? And obviously, as we can see, they want to be part of something rising, not something contracting. Now that we've talked about why Europe is pushing people out, right? We've mentioned the slow economic squeeze, political fatigue, and a middle class that is shrinking. But the more exciting piece of this story, the part that really gets a spotlight, is why Africa is pulling people in. And I think this is the part that surprises people the most. Because the Africa that we see, or the Africa that Europeans are relocating to, is not the Africa that Western media still tries to portray. Africa has become a continent of growth, of ambition, of possibility, of reinvention, and Europeans are sensing it.
Absolutely, Awa. And what's fascinating is that Europeans aren't coming because Africa is cheap. That used to be the old narrative, yeah. They're coming because Africa has something Europe is losing, and that is momentum. Africa feels like the future. Europe feels like the past. And that's so contrasting. Let's break down the key pull factors that are attracting Europeans, especially young professionals, families, entrepreneurs, creatives, and digital workers. Look at the booming tech ecosystem in Africa. That one alone is enough pull. Okay? Africa's tech sector has gone through a transformation in the last 10 years. Lagos, Nairobi, Kigali, Accra, Cape Town. They are not just competing globally, they are winning. Whenever we're talking about fintech in the world right now, Lagos comes to mind, whether we like it or not. For anything fintech, you just have to think about Lagos. You have to think about Nigeria. Then there's AI and machine learning. There's food tech. There's clean tech. There's climate innovation, e-commerce, digital finance. These sectors are exploding with opportunities, and Europeans are very observant. They are noticing all of this. But here is the twist. Europe's tech ecosystem is slowing down. Africa is speeding up. Venture capital is pouring into African market. Startup accelerators are multiplying. Talent pipelines are, expanding. There's digital infrastructure which is improving. And that's what builders want. They want a place where they can solve problems. They are not looking for a place of perfection. You don't feel like a perfection place that you can only modify. You're not building. And it is natural for a builder to look for a place where everything still feels unachieved yet, where you can, modify, you can start from ground up and build something meaningfully. And basically, that's one major reason why you're seeing all these tech guys coming into Africa, working remotely for European companies and staying in Africa while building their own here in Africa.
Absolutely. And then there's the tax incentive, yeah? Governments in Africa are getting smarter in competing for talent, capital, and innovation. And they're offering Europeans something Europe rarely offers anyone anymore, which is a chance to breathe financially. Let's run through a few examples, yeah? Rwanda is one of the easiest places to register a business in Africa. Low corporate tax of about 15%, visa on arrival for nearly all nationalities. And if you look at Mauritius, there's permanent residency through investment, zero capital gains tax, flat 15% income tax, and it's one of the easiest business environments in the world. Look at Ghana. Ghana tax holidays for startup, is becoming something that keeps pushing investment into the country. There's also special incentives for tech, film industry, and tourism. Look at the year of return movement in Ghana, right? It has strengthened African diaspora networks, right? That's for Ghana. There's Namibia. Namibia has new residency schemes for foreign professionals, climate tech investment incentives, just to mention a few benefits of investing in these countries. And Europeans look at these incentives and say, wait, I can actually start a business, I can afford a home, I can raise a family with less stress, I can build something meaningful. And suddenly, Africa looks like a real option. Not too exotic, but can be called home.
Yeah, I quite agree. Not too exotic, to be honest. We've not gotten to that point where you start buying a coffee for $10 or 10 euros. Nah, we've not gotten to that point. You live a moderate lifestyle and you live fine. One of the biggest pull that Africa has over Europe will be the real estate opportunities and urban growth. Let's be honest. To get a decent studio apartment in Europe, you need to spend an average or a minimum of 1,500 euros. And if you calculate that, that's about an average of 18,000 euros annually. That's literally 30 million naira in Nigeria. More than, okay? And you would get a comfortable furnished apartment in Lagos, in one of the eyebrow areas of Lagos, annual rent with that. In fact, that apartment you get would, get you a large modern apartment, sometimes with a gym, backup power, and a very lovely view in Africa. And, Europeans love the contrast. They love the urban growth in Kigali, in Nairobi, in Dakar, in Accra, in Cape Town. Another thing they also talk about is safety. Okay, I've seen people, or when these Europeans take their walk in the evening, and I try to engage them because 2 particular hours they try to take their walk is early in the morning or late in the evening, something around 6. Most especially those in my own street here. There's this particular family, a couple, the 2 of them, they should be in their 60s. You see them in the morning and you see them in the evening. There was one time we crossed paths, taking a walk. And I tried engaging them. They said a couple of times that they kind of feel safe in Africa than in Europe. And that's quite contrasting. Imagine, never in my life would I have thought someone would say they feel safe in Africa than in Europe. And, so many accounts have, treated how they feel more relaxed in Mauritius than in London, how there's less tension in Dakar than in Rome. All this shock is not being perpetrated or is not being reported by the Western media to suit us. The way the Western media portray Africa, you'll be surprised that is it not the same Africa that these Westerners, these Europeans are coming into. Despite that, I think that real estate alone is enough proof, if you ask me.
Absolutely. I mean, housing is one of the basic necessities of life, right? And any place that offers it seamlessly would always get more attention, right? So moving on, another thing that adds to the pull into Africa is the lifestyle appeal. The sunlight, the community, the space, the freedom, the human side. Because Europeans aren't just looking for jobs, right? No one just wants to work every day of their life. They want to live as well. And Africa offers that. Yes, we work hard in Africa, but we play harder. There's richer cultural experience, warmer communities, more joy, more space, slower pace of life, stronger social bond. And these are things that we believe in Africa keeps us running. I've spoken to a lot of my friends that have had to relocate to the UK or Canada, where I have to offer emotional support to them because they complain that they have to work all the time, work. It had to form relationships with people. It had to date. It had to go to parties, even though they are available, but because you belong to a system that keeps you on your toes, right? It had to even enjoy anything outside of life. And when you are not working, you are resting because there's more work to do.
I totally understand. When you have to be on the call for more than 5 hours just because your friends and families outside Nigeria are very bored, they cannot connect, they can't hang out, they can't party. To be honest, I totally relate. Well, another massive pull is the rising economic zone and trade opportunity. Most importantly, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, AFCTA. I mean, that's like the largest free trade zone in the world by population. Over 1.3 billion people. Businesses that position themselves early in Africa is emerging markets can scale faster than in Europe, where markets are saturated. So that's even an attractive pool enough for business oriented Europeans to come to Africa.
Okay, now I'm back. Let's move to the part of this conversation where things get a bit complicated. Because while reverse migration brings opportunity, it brings capital diversity like we've been talking about for a couple of minutes, it also comes with power dynamics we have to address honestly. This isn't just about Europeans moving to Africa, it's about how power moves with them. And if we don't talk about it, we miss what this shift truly means for African cities, for African talent, for returnees, and for the continent's long-term economic sovereignty. Migration is never neutral. People just don't get up and move. They bring expectation, they bring habits, systems, advantages, and some blind spots as well. And Europeans coming to Africa often have stronger passports, easier access to capital like you mentioned earlier, remote jobs paying in euros, a global network, higher average salaries, and a confidence shaped by privilege, right? This is not really an intentional effort, right? It's structural. And this creates a fascinating and sometimes uncomfortable power realignment in African cities.
I quite agree, because we are seeing a quiet recreation of old hierarchies. We are seeing a recolonization of African countries by Europeans, not because of the fact that they are holding guns or they have enough soldiers or enough artillery, but because of a larger financial war chest. Okay, let's start with the most sensitive question. Are Europeans becoming the new expatriate elite? Yeah, are they becoming the new privileged class in major African cities? Because in many places, the answer is yes. Go to Kigali, go to Nairobi, go to Dakar, go to Lagos in Ikoyi and Lekki Phase 1. You find European clusters living comfortably, and often their income, even mid-level salary, stretches further than any local household. And this leads to something complex, Okay, Europeans are not coming as a struggling migrant. They are coming as a privileged migrant. Any European salaries while living in African cities, this automatically puts them above local graduates, local workers, local entrepreneurs. Even some diaspora returnees have complained. And this shaped the landscape. Now seeing rental prices increasing. That's why if you are working a 9 to 5 in Lagos, unless you are working for a very big firm or let's say corporations, I doubt if you can afford a rent in Lekki or in Ikoyi. But these people, even with their average salary they earn from wherever they are coming from, they can live comfortably in the eyebrow areas. Okay? Neighborhoods are not getting gentrified. Services are priced for foreigners, not locals. Local families now get pushed out of areas they once could afford. This is not intentional harm, but it is a structural harm. Go to Bodija. Bodija used to be a place where, middle class, high class can afford. But now, if you are not extremely in the high class, you can't afford to live there. The same thing is happening in so many places across Africa.
I totally agree with you. And there's something currently trending, talking about this gentrification. It's between the girlies coming to Nigeria for Dirty December and we, the locals in Nigeria. So a lot of girls, most girls, when they come to Nigeria, they want to make braids, before going back to wherever they're coming from. And you see a girl doing a blog, a TikTok saying, come with me to make my braids for £150. Come with me to do this for... It's quite cheap to them. They say it with so much joy because they are spending really cheap compared to where they are coming from. But Nigerians, the ladies in Nigeria are complaining because now these girls are saying, okay, they are happily saying, I'm making braid for about 250,000 naira. Meanwhile, we the locals, we do it for about 10,000 naira or 15,000 naira. Can you see the big difference? And now the shops are pricing even Nigerians as high as 250,000, and it's becoming a real pandemic. There's a total war, on social media between the Dirty Decembers candidates and the locals. So that's just like, by the way, this is something we are not really talking about because in several African cities, the presence of affluent Europeans, right, and other expatriate groups has driven up costs, housing costs. Landlords have shifted prices to match foreign expectations. Even building structures, building designs, developers build for foreign demand. And local workers get priced out. Even African diasporans returning from abroad get priced out. And this is quite powerful and a bit painful if you look at it, in another way. There's the issue with restaurants trying to act all exotic, trying to accommodate the Europeans. The rent is rising, transport services are adjusting, everything is becoming more expensive. And who gets the blame? Sometimes unfairly, Europeans moving in gets the blame. But the real issue is deeper. Right? I think it's the fact that our government are prioritizing investment over equity. And for many locals, the frustration is real.
Well, that's really a solid point if you ask me. I can't imagine if my barber starts telling me I have to pay the same amount Europeans are paying for haircut. I will lead the protest though. I can imagine. So, braid your hair for 250,000 hour.
I'm low cut right now. What is your barber?
Wow, he didn't tell me actually. He didn't tell me. But for real, these are some of the issues the reverse migration is causing. And one thing we've not been looking at, or apart from the price increment, the gentrification, there is one thing we've silently been ignoring, and that is the neo-colonial shadow, like where we are seeing history silently repeating itself. Let's tread carefully because this is a sensitive topic, but we must say it plainly. Some Africans fear that this new influx of Europeans could recreate old colonial patterns, not through conquest, I mentioned that earlier, but through economic dominance, through land acquisition, through business ownership, cultural influence, political access, narrative shaping. Power today is not about flags and armies. It's about capital and access. And sometimes, Europeans moving to Africa carry a subconscious assumption of leadership. They come with a mindset of, I'll manage the company, I'll lead the project, I'll teach the locals. This subtle positioning creates tension, if not checked. A Senegalese sociologist, said something that struck with me. And he said, Europeans come to Africa for freedom. Africans go to Europe for survival. And, that already tells you what or who feels like the guest and who feels like the host. Ever since I got to hear that statement, it has changed my perspective about migration. And, as more European comes to Africa, Africans will have to manage these dynamics carefully to avoid cultural friction.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, let's talk about the irony of the competition between migrants and African returnees. So I'm talking diaspora Africans versus new Europeans. Many Africans returning home from Europe or America say that, they now find themselves competing not with locals now, but with Europeans relocating to Africa. A Sierra Leonean British software developer we met at a program recently. He returned to Freetown this year, and he was saying that the roles that he thought when he goes to Africa as someone who has gotten certificate and experience from abroad, right, he will be getting are now being filled by Europeans that left Europe to migrate to Africa. Someone was telling me a couple of years ago that the effect of a lot of Africans moving out of Africa to study is that in a couple of years, they'll come back to Africa and take up spaces where, they'll be leading spaces where Africans that studied in Africa cannot be in. Now, it's a war between the Europeans coming in newly and those African returnees. And that should be a concern. I mean, it's a concern to us, it's a concern to them, because diaspora returnees are meant to be part of Africa's development engine. Yes, they may get displaced by Western migrants seeking fresh opportunities. And this is where emotion enters the conversation, right? Because diasporas return with a desire to reconnect. Europeans arrive with a desire to reset. And these are different motives. There are different motives that sometimes clash. Returnees feel protective of home. Locals feel protective of opportunity. Foreigners feel graceful but also entitled to comfort. And it has just become a complex triangle that we need to navigate carefully.
Now, having explored the push from Europe, the pull from Africa, and the emerging power dynamics, let's talk about the future. Because this movement, Europeans coming to Africa, is not temporary trend. It is the early sign of global demographic realignment, and one that Africa has never experienced at this scale before. So the big question is Africa prepared for what this means economically, culturally, politically, and socially? That's the heartbeat of the conversation we're going to be having next right now. Because if we look at it critically, our migration is an opportunity. It is exchange. It is innovation. But it is also negotiation of power, identity, value, and access. So let's break down the opportunities and threats, because both are real and both will shape Africa's next 20 years. I'll take the opportunities and you take the threats. Let's start with the bright side. Europeans relocating to Africa bring skills. Yes, engineers, designers, developers, researchers, architects, medics, teachers, all entering the African labor market. They come with enough capital. They buy homes, rent long time, invest in startup. They build businesses. They inject foreign currency into local economy. Therein strengthening your own local currency. They have global networks. They connect African entrepreneurs to investors in Europe. They connect local artists to global markets, connect African startups to European accelerators and great pool. Then there is the knowledge transfer. When done respectfully, skill exchange is one of the most powerful forms of development. And let's not forget one of the biggest benefits, which is talent exchange. Europe is old, Africa is young, Africa has the worker, Europe has the experience. If managed well, this creates synergy, not competition. So the reverse migration is not a threat if Africans can stay in control of their narratives and their policies. If we shape the rules, we will win. That's like the key summary of the benefits that abound for Africa in this reverse migration.
I mean, you've said this all. Thank you for capturing it so brilliantly. And I like the part where you said, if we shape the rules, like if we actually shape the rules. And that's what will lead me to the threats, right? The threats, we've talked about it sparingly in this conversation, right? The threat you are saying is more of a structural risk, right? We talked about gentrification, inequality, and resource capture, and this is the difficult part, but we have to say it honestly. Africa is at risk of a soft neo-colonial wave, like Mubarak mentioned earlier, if it doesn't protect itself. Back to what Mubarak said, if we don't shape the rules. And this is not through government or through armies, but through land acquisition, capital dominance, business monopolies, foreign demand shaping domestic policies. These risks aren't imaginary, they are visible. They are visible in a lot of African cities. Talk about Accra, Cape Town, Kigali, Nairobi, Dakar. Right now we are seeing it, right? And to cap it all, there's a mix of pride and frustration. Yeah, let us sink in a bit. African diasporans are having very mixed reaction to this trend. On one hand, they are proud that Africa is becoming attractive enough to pull Europeans in. But on the other hand, some of them feel displaced again. Many diaspora Africans ask, why is it easier for Europeans to build in Africa than for Africans who return home? Why do foreign entrepreneurs get loans faster than locals? Why do expatriates have better access to permits, grants, and investors? These are questions that force Africans, to confront something crucial. If Africa becomes a destination continent, who benefit? Is it the locals? Is it the returnees or the newcomers? And the answer to that depends on policy, right? We can't just leave it to hope. We have to actually work on all of this. So to solve all these problems, this is what African governments must do. And they are non-negotiable, by the way, because policy is the difference between empowerment and exploitation. Firstly, I'm just going to take a few then, and I think Mubarak has some as well. Firstly will be to regulate foreign land ownership. No unlimited land purchases, no unchecked acquisition in prime areas. There should be strict regulations on how foreigners own lands in Africa, right? Also, we must be able to stabilize rental markets, right? The excessive hiking of rent because of they're trying to fit the European standard needs to be capped, right? And local households should be protected as well. Finally, I think for me, I'll say that governments need to enforce local hiring quotas, especially in tourism, tech, hospitality, and consulting. There should be like a law that guides on the percentage of locals that you must hire in your company moving forward. Mubarak, do you have some to share as well?
Yeah, I do. But let me pick it up from where you stopped. That there should be a law or a regulation in enforcing local hiring quotas. I know for a fact, if not for all African countries, I know that Nigeria has certain rule about hiring locals. But the reality is, do they follow these rules? Okay, that's another thing. Okay, another thing I feel like the government must do is that they must support African returnees. Okay, the same way the African government support Europeans coming in to invest, they should support African returnees as well. Don't treat our blood like, yes, it is your own. Why should you get a special treatment? They're also coming to invest. They should also get tax breaks, grants, housing incentives, level the playing field the same way they gave opportunity to European migrants. Okay. They should also prioritize local ownership of key industries, water, transport, data, energy. This can't be foreign led. We cannot outsource all of these to people that are not from our land. It should never be. Also, we should strengthen cultural integration policy. We should ensure that we insert in every of our policy document that respect not dominance, exchange, not replacement. If these policies are not in place, I can say that reverse migration might eventually become a risk and not a win for Africa. So, because the goal is not to close borders or reject newcomers, the goal is to build a system where everyone contributes, but Africans remain in control of the future of Africa. Migration should be a partnership, okay? Not a takeover. It should be a collaboration, not a hierarchy. It should be an exchange, not a replacement. Yeah, and I believe that this balance is possible, but only with thoughtful policy.
I agree with you. That's quite profound. For our regular listeners, you might be wondering that we've not talked about our regular trending investment news. And to our new listeners, we always try to chip in some investment updates into our conversations. So I would be starting with that now to round up today's conversation. So Mubarak, I know you have some as well, but let me start with Rwanda. Rwanda just launched the European Skills Exchange Visa, right? That's quite related to what we're talking about. This is a 2-year residency for European tech and engineering professionals, and this is something that has been reported widely, and a lot of Europeans are taking advantage of this opportunity. Also, Cape Verde reports 40% increase in European digital nomads between last year to this year, that's 2024 to 2025. And this is driven, according to them, by a new tax-friendly remote work policies, according to Bloomberg Africa.
Okay, let me take this one. Mauritius has announced SIVA residency program for European retirees. Reuters reported a surge in application from France, Germany, and the UK. I quite understand why people want to go to Mauritius. That's a destination place for you to live in. Personally, between Mauritius and Zanzibar, I've not decided, but I'm going for an holiday by the end of the year. That's where I'm going. Okay. Ghana also expanded its diaspora expatriate and innovation zone, and this was confirmed by the Ghana's Ministry of Trade that they opened 3 new co-innovation districts combining diaspora creators and foreign professionals. Lastly, Kenya approves new gentrification tax policy, which the new regulation creates penalties for foreign investors who inflate neighborhood housing prices beyond 15% annually. This is mind-blowing, and I think this is one of the things African governments should enforce. We should ensure that gentrification does not have a place in our system, does not have a place in our continent. Okay?
Kenya has always been the one to lead the charge, especially in policies in Africa, and it's just good to see. That's what we're talking about right here. So big ups, Kenya. So wherever you're listening from right now, whether in Oslo, Accra, Cape Town, Milan, Kigali, Paris, or Mombasa, sorry, I'm going to mention just a few. You need to remember this. Africa is rising, right? Europe is shifting. The world is reorganizing itself. At this time, Africa is not the footnote. It has become the destination.
And like I said earlier, migration is the oldest human story. And today, it is writing a new chapter, one where Africans get to decide the terms. Okay? Reverse migration can be a blessing or a burden. This can be a renaissance or a repetition, a partnership or a takeover. The difference is how we prepare. What we get is dependent on the policies and our preparation. This has been the Invest Africa Group podcast. Until next time, when the next episode pops in or the notification, pops up on your phone, on your laptop, or your iPad, everything you're using, listening to the Invest Africa Group podcast. My name remains Mubarak Abimbola. And like I tell you, stay hopeful, stay informed, and stay invested in Africa. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.